Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. It's Sunday, the 12th of September. We're well into the first month of autumn now. And so what have we got for you in today's webcast? Well, sadly, a fatal bike crash has turned into a murder investigation. And a Hereford couple have died after being hit by a motorcycle just round the corner, actually, from where I was staying just a few days ago. Villagers have given the Isle of Wight road races a thumbs down in a vote. The Moto Guzzi V100 Mandello gets shown for the first time. Apple have advised against mounting the latest iPhones on a handlebar mount on your motorcycle. And finally, today's better biking advice. We'll talk about why you should forget the brake into a corner and load up the front wheel to give you more grip advice, which is so prevalent. So that's today's show. Don't forget, if you have a comment, if you have a question, do add yours. I'll try and get back to you during the show if I possibly can. If not, I'll certainly answer it at the end of the show. So settle yourself down and next 30 minutes or so while we look at some news, possibly controversial views, and some better biking advice. All right, okay, so first thing though, a bit of a shout out to a rider I encountered in Wales. Now, let me just show you. There we go. Blurry number plates, you can't quite read it. This gentleman here on his motorcycle brushed past me. I was doing 50 odd miles per hour behind the car in front, and he brushed past at something faster than I was traveling, obviously. So close that his mirror almost caught my elbow. I was a little bit surprised by that, I have to say. I'd seen him coming up behind me, but generally speaking, motorcyclists are fairly considerate of other motorcyclists, so I was rather surprised when this chap actually overtook with very little consideration from what I was doing. Interestingly, when I got close up behind him, he obviously thought I was chasing him because the next thing was he cleared off through the traffic and made a couple of dodgy overtaking manoeuvres. So yes, obviously he was out there enjoying the roads just as I was, but you know, if you do come up on motorcyclists that aren't riding quite as quickly as you do give them some space. Anyway, on to the news. An investigation by the roads policing team after a fatal motorcycle crash in Manchester, in which a man died, has now been handed over to the force's detectives because it's been reclassified as a murder investigation. Now, police were called to this incident. It was in Moston at around 11:45 on the night of September the 7th, following reports of a crash involving one vehicle. It turned out to be a motorcycle, and the rider, Carl Dawson, who was aged 43 and from Moston itself, he died shortly after the crash. He'd been riding a Lexmoto ZTR motorcycle at the time. But police now believe that Mr. Dawson was actually being chased by another vehicle at the time of the incident. They've obtained CCTV footage which shows a white car following him very closely. Now, that car was subsequently recovered and found to have been stolen. Detective Chief Inspector Alicia Smith from Greater Manchester Police said, "Lines of inquiry have now led us to believe this man was being chased by a white vehicle at the time. We're continuing to appeal for information, especially anyone who may have seen the vehicle which was behind the motorcycle at the time. Anyone with dashcam footage is asked to contact us. Even the smallest amount of information may prove vital." So you can report it online if you do know anything about this, and you can deliver it anonymously to the police website here. I'll just put the link up to that. Right, Nick's looked in. Good morning, Nick. Good to see you. Our second story today is equally a sad one, actually, and this one struck pretty close to home, actually, because as you probably know, I took a few days off with my partner Judy for a few days of a riding holiday out to Wales. And this particular instance, sadly, happened just literally a few meters from where Judy and I were staying overnight on Monday. A 70-year-old man, his 57-year-old wife, along with their dog, they both died after being hit by a motorcycle whilst walking. Now, the collision happened on the A44 Kington bypass at the floodgates end of the town, leaving the rider, a man in his 50s, with life-threatening injuries. The Midlands Air Ambulance was scrambled from Cosford, along with 2 ambulances, a paramedic and a basics doctor. But the medical couple received treatment at the scene, but were sadly both pronounced dead. A NHS spokesman said the pedestrians, a man and a woman, were both found in critical conditions, and ambulance staff immediately began administering advanced life support. However, despite their best efforts, it sadly became apparent nothing could be done to save either patient, and they were confirmed dead at the scene. The biker was treated for injuries before being airlifted to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. The road was closed for several hours whilst an investigation took place, and police have thanked the public for their patience. They have also appealed for information, and they also want anybody with dashcam footage of the incident of the crash itself, or of the 2 motorcycles actually travelling along the A44 in or near the Kington bypass A44 between 10:45 and 11 o'clock. The incident happened at about 10:55 on Tuesday. And actually, that was just a few minutes after we actually headed back out of the town on our bike in the opposite direction. We joined the A44, the opposite end of the bypass, and that was our final ride back to London. So very sad to hear about a crash just literally just minutes and meters away from where I was riding. Now, you'll probably know that there are plans to run an international motorcycle race on the Isle of Wight, and you'll also probably know that those plans haven't exactly been proceeding smoothly, with the race on, then off, then moved to a different part of the island with new organisers, and then moved back to the original venue with those new organisers who turn out to be some of the same organisers. So it's all a real muddle. And to try to sort of put this together as a major event, it's a 12.4 mile course, and they're hoping to attract many of the top teams and riders to the event, as well, of course, as plenty of spectators. But it's still awaiting official approval. Now, the race is actually scheduled for April next year, so time is rapidly running out if the race is to actually happen, because, of course, many of the teams will be allocating their budget already towards the different events that they want to compete at next year. People will be making plans depending on where they intend to compete. So the latest setback is that the locals from the village of Brystone, which happens to sit to the north west of the circuit. I should, with a bit of luck, have a map to show you. Here it goes. Let's just put that up. So you can see, if I zoom in on the picture there, I'm not sure if I can, yes, there we go, just up in the top corner of the circuit, you can see Brystone is up there on the sort of northwest side of the track. What's happened there is that the parish council have sent out a survey. It was delivered to 878 residences in the area. Each member of the household was asked to contribute a vote on whether they thought the event should go ahead or not. And 499 surveys were actually returned. That's 56% of the forms, which I suspect is probably quite a high return rate for a council survey. And the bad news is, for motorcycle fans, is that just 31% of the residents were in favour of the race, which would go through and close down their village for a week in April, and 68% were against. So Brystone Parish Council are due to follow this up with their own meeting, which will go ahead with race organisers in the very near future, and they will have an opportunity there to ask questions of those organisers, many of which have arisen in that correspondence with the locals. So, okay, don't forget you are watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams, Survival Skills Rider Training. You can catch the show every Wednesday and Sunday at 11 a.m. And if you miss it live, you can head over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK at the end, or you'll end up watching somebody sharpening knives or lighting fires with sticks or something similar. And you can also, of course, follow it on Facebook after it goes out live here on Facebook. So, okay, what else have we got for you? Well, a new motorcycle has been unveiled, and this is it. It's the Moto Guzzi V100 Mandello. Now, the Italian company, as I reported earlier this year, has just celebrated its 100th year of operations, and they actually teased this bike with a poster which had basically pictures of all their models, right from the very first to the very latest. And the very last image on this poster was actually a blurred out silhouette of a bike. So there were lots of suggestions, of course, that there could be a new motorcycle, and this would appear to be it. It's now been revealed in its full glory, and it'll be seen in the flesh at the autumn bike shows. Now, here are the basic details. It's a water-cooled 122 horsepower 1000cc machine. There's no data yet on weight, fuel capacity, seat height, or anything like that. It's thought to have the now usual digital instrument console and a full LED lighting setup. And if you look very closely, you can just see a pair of tiny indicators mounted on the radiator shroud, and there another pair on the number plate hanger. A close study of the picture shows it gets Brembo brakes, it gets inverted telescopic forks at the front side, which are reckoned by one expert to be Öhlins. You get a single-sided swinger at the rear. It's not clear in that picture, but you'll see it in the second one I've got for you. The single shock looks to be easily adjustable as well. You can get to it, which isn't the case with all single shock motorcycles. It gets the trademark Guzzi shaft drive, but if you look closely, you'll also see that's mounted on the wrong side for a Guzzi, presumably to allow the exhaust to tuck in tight to the wheel on this particular side that you're seeing. Thankfully, it eschews the current trend for a sawn-off rear seat, what are called the 1+1 rear end, and it actually does have a decent size pillion perch, so somebody can actually sit on it, which is handy. It certainly carries over some of the design elements from classic 1980s Moto Guzzi. It looks a tad like the old V50, V75 to my eye. Somebody else suggested it actually looks like the TDM 900, which was a Yamaha from much the same era. And I have to say that whilst the TDM was actually an underrated bike, it wasn't a great looker. And I can see the resemblance to that in the fairing as well. I'm not entirely convinced by that little screen and its lines. The screen itself actually is so small and narrow, it looks like it'll be pretty pointless. But having said that, given that every manufacturer, bar none, now has a range of factory fit goodies with which to bulk out the under-spec'd base model, I suspect there's a very, very good chance there'll be an add-on touring kit to go with the bike, which will probably come with a higher screen and a higher price. Now, if you look very closely, the interesting thing is most of the comments on the bike have actually focused on the shape and the design and the color scheme, which I'll come back to. But the interesting thing is that hardly anybody seems to have spotted the genuinely unique development. Look at the cylinder head. Look at the angle that the exhaust system exits. The heads are twisted through 90 degrees on this bike, so that the exhaust basically exits at right angles to the line of the machine. Now, with the trademark V-twin layout, that does mean that the fuel injection the injector bodies themselves can be hidden neatly along with the airbox under the front of the petrol tank and out of the way of the rider's knees. A common complaint with the older Guzzis was that the carburetors were in fact just where you wanted to put your knees. The second advantage it gives is that the radiator can be the full width of the engine, which means it can be reasonably shallow. With the conventional sticky out exhausts on bikes like the CX500, for example, the radiator was actually quite narrow, quite tall. Which I suppose puts it a little bit more out of the line of fire from stone chips and that kind of thing. So there are obviously some plus points, but I have to say that it looks just damned odd to me with the way that the pipes come out, and then they turn through a very sharp angle, which is never great for gas flow, and it dives then under the body of the machine into, I have to say, what is one of the ugliest exhausts I've seen for a long time. You kind of get used to the underbelly catalytic converter and silencer element, but the exhaust can, I just think, actually looks quite nasty on this. I don't like that at all. The other thing that I'd be slightly concerned about is crash damage. If the bike ends up sliding on its side, I can see that pipe being ripped out of the head and requiring some very expensive repairs indeed. Okay, so what do I think of the bike? Well, I said I couldn't decide whether I liked it or loathed it. I have to say that I quite like the red color scheme that I showed you first, but this mishmash of sort of silver gray, I'm not quite sure what color shade of green that is, plus the clashing gold forks on that one. I just don't like that at all. I think that's actually quite nasty, but hey ho. We all have different likes, and some people will no doubt think that it's a stunner. You can tell me what you think about it, and there's a bit of a video here that you can have a look at too. Right, so don't forget, if you are enjoying these shows, you can always head over to my Ko-fi page and support me over there. That's the URL, where you will find hundreds of better biking articles. At the moment, I'm just putting up the 2019 posts. I've got a couple of months of those done now. Everything from 2014 to 2018, that's 5 years of skills on Saturday and tips on Tuesday posts are already up. So that's 500 and more going up every day, as I say. So plenty to read, and just for the cost of a coffee. So if you're not already supporting me over there, do pop over, and if you buy me a coffee, you'll get all that to read and a lot more besides. Now, okay, what's your mobile phone of choice? Is it an iPhone? Is it Android? Well, if it's an iPhone, I've got a bit of bad news for you. If you're using it on a mount on your motorcycle, you may want to rethink that, because a new Apple support post has come out warning that what they call high amplitude vibrations, specifically those generated by high power motorcycle engines, though they go on to talk about use on scooters as well. If those vibrations are transmitted through the handlebars, they can and have damaged its phone's cameras. Now, I have seen a number of user posts in recent weeks. I think the most recent was literally just a few weeks ago, about people using iPhones on bikes and then finding the cameras pack up. And this support alert is all about that problem. Now, it appears that the issue lies with two of the systems which assist the user to take clear shots with the phone camera. The camera uses an optical image stabilization system, which they call OIS, which actually happens to be a gyroscope. Now, the gyroscope senses the camera body moving and basically then adjusts the position of the lens to try to prevent blur if the camera moves when you're taking a photo. And there is a second autofocus feature, which uses magnetic sensors, and that can also be damaged by movement. That allows you to sort of move the camera back and forth a bit, but keeps the camera focused. So if you, again, if it maintains focus for you. So these two systems make for nice clear photos, but they're both very vulnerable to vibration. Now, it turns out that all models since the iPhone 7 come with both of these features, and Apple's advice is not to attach the iPhones to motorcycles. Other sources are suggesting that you can use a vibration damping mount, usually connected to a link to Sony one. But frankly, given the quite numerous reports of non-functioning iPhone cameras and the high price of iPhones in the first place, it may not be worth the risk. So why would you want to mount a camera on the bars? Well, if all you want to do is talk to somebody, you don't need to do that. You could easily keep it in a tank bag, or even in your pocket. But if you want to use it for navigation, that's the usual reason, of course. One article suggested using a cheap phone on the bike, and that's not a bad idea. It may not have all the bells and whistles of an iPhone, but hey ho, do you use those while you're riding? Probably not. So if you buy a cheap Android phone and it packs up, you can throw it away and buy a new one. But my preference is always to use a dedicated outdoor GPS and keep it entirely separate from your phone, usually because those things are waterproof. My GPS on my bike is 100% waterproof. Okay, so that brings us on to today's better biking discussion. Now, this arises directly from something that appeared in the comments to yesterday's Schools on Saturday post. Now, if you read the post itself, it basically was a suggestion for a series of exercises which every new rider, I think, should carry out. Every rider with a new bike should carry out to familiarize themselves with how the brakes on that particular machine work. You've probably got off one machine and onto another and found that the brakes are totally different. I've got a couple of modern-ish 600s, and I've also got a 40-year-old 250, and they're chalk and cheese to ride. I have to sort of recalibrate every time I get onto the 250, but I know how those bikes differ. But if you've only just acquired a new bike, it really is a good idea to go and check out how the brakes work before you actually ride it in anger. Anyway, to cut to the chase, the response which came in, it was a bit off topic. It was in response to the idea that you should get used to using the rear brake when turning. The essence of the question was a suggestion that if we're going around a bend using the rear brake, to quote, there is less weight on the front suspension than tyre. So surely that means there's more likelihood of the front wheel washing out. Well, first of all, I was talking about slow turns, not open road riding at speed. So, the whole issue of losing the front because you've got a little bit of brake on the rear, so it just simply doesn't apply. The only possible time it could is if you're doing what I also suggest, which is trailing the rear brake into a downhill corner, because that helps prevent gravity accelerating the bike down the hill without going bonkers with downshifting to try to get some engine braking. And using the rear brake in this way down the hill, after you've got the slowing down done upright in a straight line, you're using the rear brake to maintain speed through a downhill corner. It's a really useful technique, but one that few riders actually seem to use on the road, and I don't really know why that is. Anyway, so what about the idea that using the front into the corner will load up the front suspension and give more grip? Well, it's known as trail braking, braking into corners, and here's my answer on the idea that it gives you more grip and is thus a good thing. In short, I would not advise braking into a corner unless you absolutely have to, and I'll come on to why you might have to in just a moment. But I think as a default approach to brakes, as my correspondent was suggesting, I think it's deeply flawed. I say that knowing full well that it's regularly promoted as a better way to corner in the press and by various influencers on YouTube and other social media sites. So why do I think this? Well, here are my reasons. First of all, think what happens to your bike if we brake harshly mid-corner. The bike sits up and tries to go straight on. Now, if we are braking mid-corner, the same forces are developed, and it doesn't matter whether we start the braking in the corner itself or whether we start the braking before we arrive at the corner. The same dynamic responses are happening. The only thing that changes is the timing of which you apply the brakes. The bike is still wanting to sit upright if we are carrying brakes from upright into the corner. If you don't believe that, there's a very simple way to find out and prove it to yourself, and that's to try braking into the bend, as some people, as we've just heard, suggested, and then let go of the front brake very suddenly. And what you'll find is that the bike will topple into the corner, and that's because you have removed the force which is trying to make the bike sit up. It'll fall into the corner very suddenly, and it actually can be very disconcerting, downright scary, in fact, when you are braking hard and there's a lot of sit-up force. You're overcoming that with a counter-steering force, and that counter-steering force will suddenly make your bike topple into the corner. So you're taking one force away and the other one suddenly gets let loose on the steering of the bike. So there are a lot of dynamics going on at the front end of the motorcycle, which is important to understand when we suggest any technique like this. So whether we realize it or not, and most riders don't seem to realize it when they talk about braking into corners, we've been applying some extra steering input to keep the bike on the line we want it to follow. So basically, at the most basic, the most fundamental level, braking into corners makes the rider work a little bit harder to keep the bike on line. So there's a physical input from the rider. Now, secondly, think about the vector forces involved. There are two sets of forces when we are riding, and they're operating upright. They're operating at right angles to each other. The first is a braking force, and that operates in the direction of travel any instant. The second will be the steering force, which is trying to drag the front of the bike sideways. Now, if we're upright, all the braking force is absolutely in line with the rest of the bike. Now, that does two things. It gives the suspension itself a much easier time because it's only having to deal with the braking force. The second point is, though, if it, for some reason, the front tire does lose grip, the tire and the bike behind it will go in a straight line. And that means, because the bike is upright, the bike will slide with or without ABS. It'll carry on upright and going straight ahead. But if we're cornering, then two things happen. The first is that the very fact that the bike is leaning over means that the suspension is partly compressed because it has to absorb the forces which are trying to make the bike slide out of the corner. Now, what that does is it reduces the suspension travel that is available for soaking up bumps. Now, that may not be important on a racetrack where there aren't so many bumps, where it's relatively smoothly surfaced, but on the road, it means that if we do have a bump under our wheel, it's going to compromise the front tire's grip as we hit it. Now, here's the first bit of really bad news. When we're braking and steering simultaneously, we're actually asking for more grip from the front tire because we're trying to do two things at once. Now, if you remember, I've talked about the traction pie in the past. What that means is it pushes us closer to the edge of grip than if we were braking or steering, but not both together. So we may be generating some more grip from the front tire because we are compressing the tire into the road surface, but we're also using more because we're trying to make the bike slow and turn at the same time. And so here's the second bit of really bad news. If the tire does lose grip, either because we simply leaned over and braked too hard, we mixed and matched the forces and ran out of grip, or because we hit a bump and the tire couldn't cope with that sudden deflection caused by the bump, now the bike is trying to follow a curved path. But the moment the tire loses grip, it wants to go straight on. And that means it travels at a tangent to the bike's intended path. And what that means is, of course, that the front tire gracefully slides out from underneath us. Now, years ago, a racer admitted that saving a front wheel slide mid-corner is about as rare as surviving a shark attack. So if you do lose front wheel grip whilst in the middle of a bend, you are likely to crash. Now, if you think that's bad, it gets even worse. Think about the road surface. Traction depends on two things. It depends on the friction of the surface itself, and it depends on the grip of the tire. So it's what's known as a coefficient and need hot to work. If you put a sticky tire on an abrasive surface, as you get to a racetrack, then there is loads of stick between the tire and the road. You get lots and lots of traction. But as I said, tire is only half of the traction equation. Doesn't matter what you have on the front tire of your motorcycle, it won't work any better than the level of grip offered by the road surface. So whilst our front tire grip doesn't really change, it might get a bit better as the tire warms up, it might get a bit worse if the weather's really cold. The road surface changes on a meter to meter basis. It can go from very grippy to very slick in an instant. And if the road is as slick as ice, it absolutely doesn't matter how much extra grip we're getting from loading the front, because the tire cannot stick to a surface that's giving us nothing back, and we guarantee that the tire will slide out from under us. Now, there's no guarantee we won't suffer that same loss of grip while we're braking upright, because the road surface can be slippery where we're braking. But as we've just seen, if we lose grip upright, the bike will carry on in a straight line, and we can cope with that. So if we remove all the braking force to the straight line, we reduce the amount of work that the front tire is trying to do when we get to the corner. And that means if we do find a slippery patch of surface mid-bend and we have reduced traction, we actually give the front tire a better chance of sticking to what grip there is by keeping the bike steering than we will do by loading the front and braking and steering simultaneously. So as I say, coming off the brakes early, the front tire, all it has to do is steer, and with reduced grip it is more likely to stick. And if a tire does break traction, if we're on the throttle round the corner, it's most likely to be a rear. Now, rear wheel slides are much more easily controlled, relatively speaking, than front wheel slides. And the other thing to remember is that because the rear is actually sliding out from the direction of travel, we're actually turning the bike in the direction we want to go. Think speedway. So rather than losing the front end and sliding out and into the path of an oncoming Scania on a left-hand bend, we're actually speedway style sliding the bike around the corner and getting the bike turned. It's not my preferred method for getting around bends. If I can possibly avoid losing either end, I will, but at least it gives you a better chance of staying out of trouble. Now, my fourth point is this: braking upright and early actually gives us more time to look around the bend. And that's absolutely vital on the road. On the racetrack, you've been round the bend probably dozens of times, if not hundreds of times before. You know exactly where the corner goes. So you're not actually scanning the road ahead to find out new information. All you're doing is making sure you're on the right bit of the track for that particular turn, and you're making a note of where other riders are. But on the road, it's likely that, in fact, every bend is different, even if we know it every single time we go around it. So we're gathering lots of information. If we can get the speed off early, we have more time to look and gather that information on the road. But it also does something rather less obvious. What we're doing with the controls actually massively influences where we look. Now, we're regularly told we should pick up our view and look as far ahead as possible, but if we are on the brakes, our attention is focused down on the road surface. It's an absolutely natural response. We want to know that the tire is actually on a grippy bit of road so we can steer to avoid slippery bits. So if we're on the throttle, we must actually be happy with the surface under our wheels. So what it does is actually frees up our attention to pick up our view and start looking further ahead round the bend. So if you find you're struggling to get your vision up and around a corner, check where you are braking. There's a good chance you're leaving it too late and you're focused down on the road surface as you come up to a bend, rather than being back on the throttle and getting your view lifted and up around the corner. So get your braking completed early, get back on the throttle early, and I pretty much guarantee that you'll see literally the difference in your cornering. And my final thought on this is a survival skill, pure and simple. The comment also suggested that we should brake into the corner until the limit point begins to move away. Now, have a think about that. The limit point is the furthest place at which we have an unobstructed view of the road ahead. So by definition, everything beyond the limit point is blind. We can't see through it. Now, what happens if we approach a corner and the limit point continues to move towards us? Well, basically it means the bend is getting ever tighter. So we need to actually go into that bend slower and slower and slower. Now, if we're already trail braking into a corner, it does mean that we'll be losing speed. And for that reason, because we're losing speed, our line will actually sharpen up around the corner. But what if that isn't enough? What if we're not losing enough speed quickly enough? Do we try to brake harder? Do we try to steer tighter? Do we try to do both? If we do, the danger is that we'll push ourselves rapidly over the grip of traction or even on a grippy road surface. And the proof of this is the crash that we see all the time out on the racetrack when the rider runs a bit wide in the corner and tries to pull the bike back online by braking and leaning over a little bit more. And that's very often the moment that the front goes out from under him or her. So in short, trail braking is a track technique. Now, I do teach it on my Performance Sport 2-day course on the road, and you're more than welcome to ask me about that particular course and find out why I teach it. It's because I teach it as a recovery technique when we cock up. When we misread the tightness of a bend, or we arrive a little bit too quick into a corner because we didn't get the brakes on hard enough or early enough, or we can use it to cope with a decreasing radius corner that isn't obvious till the last moment. Now, I had plenty of those to deal with in Wales last weekend, and I certainly couldn't have got around some of them without braking into the corner. But it's not my routine choice. I don't argue that it increases grip into corners. I don't believe that we need it as a performance aid. The only reason that we need more grip is to ride faster, isn't it? And so I'd say that it shouldn't be your default technique into bends either. And if you think it's good advice for the road, I really, really think you should re-evaluate the technique wherever and whoever you actually got the tip from in the first place. Now, final point. If I'm getting all my braking completed upright and you're braking into the bend, then you will come past me on the way into the corner. That's a given. But if I'm already on the throttle from the entry point where the bend starts to the turning point where I sharpen my line, and I'm already accelerating as I hit the exit of the corner, I'll come straight back past you whilst you're still trying to get the bike stopped mid-turn. And I'm looking further down the road and I'm getting my planning sorted out for the next hazard whilst you're still trying to get exiting the corner that you're in. So essentially, this technique is not of benefit on the road from the mental point of view or the practical point of view for riding corners. So that's why I don't recommend it. And now you have hopefully my rationale, 20 odd minutes of it, to think about why you should not believe this advice to brake into corners and load up the front tire with extra grip, because A, you don't need it, and B, it makes things more difficult for you on the road. Leave it for the track where it's fine. Leave it as an emergency get out of trouble technique, and that's fine too. But don't believe the arguments that it actually makes cornering better. It doesn't. Right, so that's pretty much it for today. So I'll just run down with some reminders for today's show. I'm still running riding assessments right throughout September. We can still get them done by dusk. So that's a 1 hour out on the road and a 1 hour assessment of your riding via a video. So drop me a line if you're interested in those. Don't forget the Science of Being Seen. The next presentation is going to be Wednesday, the 6th of October at 8 o'clock. Tickets are £5. For that, it's basically about a 45-minute long talk on the SMIDSY collision, the causes thereof, the visual perception issues that drivers face, and it gives you some proactive solutions to the problem that you can apply to your own riding. And as you probably know, we've won some international road safety awards for Biker Down, and the Science of Being Seen was part of that course. And I have personally taken Science of Being Seen out to New Zealand, and I've delivered it online for Rev Talks over in the US as well. And it also featured on the Road Safety GB Powered Two-Wheeler event earlier this year. So do drop me a line on that if you want to know more. Head over to the sign up page if you're interested in attending that live. I will also be running that at regular intervals, probably every couple of months over the next, well, certainly over the course of the winter. I'll probably really evaluate in the spring, see how we're getting on. Right, so we've got Nigel has said good morning. He made it for the end. Martin Kelly says thanks you for clearing that up for me. I think you're referring to the breaking into corners, aren't you, Martin? Samantha says informative as ever. Thanks. Well, thank you all for the very positive comments. So that's it for today's show. It's gone on just a little bit longer than I thought it would, but I'll be back with the next one on Wednesday. So look forward to seeing you then. Do look in, but for now, if you're out there riding again, ride safe.